When I began this journey, the thought of living as Christ the human for 30 days felt almost unimaginable. Christ, the embodiment of divine love, compassion, and sacrifice, lived a life so distant from the world we inhabit today. And yet something within me felt called to walk in his footsteps, to experience what it would mean to live not just as a follower of Christ, but to embody his very essence as a human being. I wanted to strip away the layers of idealization we place on his story and confront the raw, human experience of someone who lived with both divine awareness and earthly suffering.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
The first thing I realized was that living as Christ is not about performing miracles or preaching to the masses. It's about something much deeper, something that resonates at the core of what it means to be human. Christ, above all else, was fully human. He ate, he slept, he felt joy, he felt pain, he was loved, and he was betrayed. To live as Christ for 30 days would mean embracing all aspects of the human condition, the highs and the lows, the profound and the mundane. For the first few days, I focused on the simplest aspects of his life: humility and service. Christ washed the feet of his disciples, he fed the hungry and healed the sick. So I started my mornings in silence, reflecting on the humbleness of his actions. I spent hours each day volunteering at shelters, listening to people's stories, and trying to offer the kind of compassion and attention that Christ must have offered to those around him. It was harder than I expected. In a world filled with distractions, we often forget how difficult it is to be fully present with someone else. Have you ever noticed how rare it is for us to really listen? Not just to hear the words, but to truly listen with our whole being. In those moments, sitting with people who had been forgotten by society, I felt the weight of Christ's compassion. It wasn't grandiose. It wasn't about being a savior. It was about being present. And yet there was something profound about that simplicity. But as I continued, something deeper began to stir within me. Living as Christ isn't just about kindness and service. It's also about facing the darker sides of human existence: the pain, the doubt, the fear. I began to ask myself, can we truly live as Christ if we don't also confront the suffering that comes with it? Christ was betrayed by his closest friends. He was rejected by his community. He was persecuted, humiliated, and ultimately crucified. To live as Christ for 30 days would mean confronting my own betrayals, rejections, and fears. And this, I realized, was where the true transformation began. By the second week, I found myself wrestling with my own sense of failure and inadequacy. The more I tried to live with Christ's compassion, the more I felt the weight of my own imperfections. I wanted to be patient, but I was impatient. I wanted to be forgiving, but old grudges resurfaced. I wanted to be loving, but I found myself getting frustrated. It was in these moments of frustration that I began to understand something profound about Christ's humanity. He wasn't immune to these feelings. In the Gospels, we see moments where Christ is deeply human. He weeps, he expresses anger, he feels abandoned by God. The difference wasn't that he didn't experience these emotions, it was that he transcended them. He didn't let them define him. He acknowledged them, moved through them, and returned to love. And so I began to ask myself, what does it mean to love in the face of our own imperfections? How do we love when we feel unworthy, when we feel anger or fear or doubt? These questions became the heart of my journey. I began to meditate on the moments in Christ's life when he was tested, the temptations in the desert, the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, the moment on the cross when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" These weren't just moments of spiritual testing. They were deeply human experiences of fear, doubt, and suffering. And yet Christ emerged from each of these moments with an unshakable commitment to love. In my own life, I started to notice the moments when I felt tested. It wasn't always in big, dramatic ways. Sometimes it was in the smallest things: the frustration of dealing with a difficult person, the temptation to judge someone, the fear of being vulnerable. Each of these moments became an opportunity to choose a different path. I began to ask myself, what would Christ do in this moment, not as a divine being, but as a human facing these same struggles? And here's the thing: Christ's path wasn't always easy. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing love, even when it was hard. It was about facing the pain, the fear, the rejection, and choosing to love anyway. This, I realized, was the real challenge of living as Christ. It wasn't about performing miracles or being some idealized version of myself. It was about embracing the messy, imperfect reality of being human and still choosing to love. As I moved into the third week, something began to shift. I started to feel a deeper sense of peace, not because life had gotten easier, but because I was learning to let go of the need for control. Christ lived with an openness to the divine flow of life. He didn't try to control everything or avoid discomfort. He accepted what came, trusting in the deeper wisdom of God's plan. This wasn't about passivity. It was about surrendering the ego's need to have everything figured out, to be perfect, to avoid pain. It was about trusting that even in the midst of suffering, there is a deeper purpose, a deeper love at work. I began to see my own life in this way. The challenges I faced weren't obstacles to be overcome. They were opportunities to deepen my faith, to open my heart, to trust that even in the moments of doubt and pain, I was being guided by something greater. And this, I believe, is one of the greatest lessons we can learn from Christ's life. Now, as I approached the final week of this journey, I felt a sense of clarity. Living as Christ the human is not about becoming perfect or enlightened. It's about becoming fully human. It's about embracing both the joy and the suffering, the light and the darkness, and choosing to love through it all. You may be wondering, how do we carry this forward into our own lives? The truth is, we are all called to live as Christ, not in the sense of performing miracles or being saints, but in the sense of being fully human, fully alive, fully present to the divine within ourselves and within others. In the final days of this journey, I found myself returning again and again to one simple question: what would love do in this moment? And this, I believe, is the essence of living as Christ. It's not about grand gestures or impossible standards. It's about choosing love in the ordinary moments of life. It's about choosing love when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when it feels like the last thing you want to do. This journey wasn't about transforming into some idealized version of Christ. It was about transforming my relationship with myself, with others, and with the world around me. It was about realizing that Christ's humanity was his greatest gift to us. He showed us that even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of imperfection, we can still choose love. And so, as I bring this journey to a close, I want to leave you with this question: how can you embody Christ's love in your own life? not as a perfect being, but as a human being, facing all the challenges, joys, and sorrows of life. This is the path we are all called to walk. This is what it means to live as Christ. It's not about perfection, it's about love. And love, as Christ showed us, is the most powerful force in the universe. What I realized after 30 days is that living as Christ isn't something we do for a set period of time. It's a choice we make every single day. It's a choice to be fully human, to embrace our imperfections, and to love through it all. As I reflect on these 30 days of living as Christ the human, I realize that the true essence of this journey is one that doesn't end. It extends beyond the boundaries of a single experience or moment in time. It's a continuous unfolding, a commitment to embodying love, compassion, and forgiveness in every interaction, in every breath we take. And it's hard, it's messy, it's uncomfortable, but that's the point, isn't it? When I first started, I expected there to be some kind of divine revelation, a moment where I would transcend the difficulties and suddenly everything would make sense. But what I found, instead, was that the beauty of Christ's life wasn't in the absence of struggle, it was in the way he moved through it. He didn't avoid suffering, he walked straight into it. He embraced it. Not because he enjoyed it, but because he saw it as part of the larger plan, part of the journey towards something greater. This is one of the hardest lessons I've had to face over the last 30 days. How do we learn to see our struggles not as burdens but as gifts? How do we embrace the pain, the loss, the disappointments, and see them as pathways to deeper understanding, deeper compassion? Living as Christ taught me that the very things we try to avoid, our fears, our doubts, our failures, are the things that can lead us to a deeper connection with the divine. They strip us of our ego, our need for control, and open us up to a higher wisdom, a higher love. When Christ was in the garden, facing his own crucifixion, he didn't pretend that everything was fine. He didn't deny his fear. He cried out, asking for the cup to be taken from him. But in the end, he surrendered. He trusted that even in his darkest hour, God was with him. And this is what I learned: true surrender is not giving up. It's giving into something greater, something beyond our understanding. It's trusting that even when we don't see the way forward, we are being guided. In my final week, I started to let go of my expectations of what this journey was supposed to be. I stopped trying to force myself to feel a certain way, to be a certain way. Instead, I just allowed myself to be. I allowed the discomfort, the doubts, the fears to exist without trying to change them. And in that space, something shifted. I started to experience a deeper sense of peace, not because the challenges disappeared, but because I no longer saw them as obstacles. I saw them as opportunities. I began to ask myself every day, what if every challenge, every difficulty is an invitation to grow? What if the things that scare us the most are the very things that will set us free? The final days of this journey were some of the most profound. I spent more time in silence, just sitting with the experience, letting it sink in. There was no rush, no need to reach some final destination. I realized that living as Christ the human is not about reaching enlightenment or becoming perfect. It's about learning to be fully present in each moment, to live with an open heart, even when that heart is breaking. Christ's life wasn't just about his miracles or his teachings. It was about how he lived his humanity. He laughed, he cried, he felt joy, he felt sorrow. He lived each moment fully, without holding back. He showed us that being human is not a limitation. It's a gift that allows us to experience the full spectrum of existence, from the deepest pain to the highest joy. And here's the thing: we are all capable of living this way. We don't have to be saints or enlightened beings to live as Christ did. We just have to be willing to show up, to be present, to love, even when it's hard, even when it feels like the world is against us. I think back to the beginning of this journey, and I realize how much has changed. I expected to learn how to be more like Christ, but what I really learned was how to be more like myself, my truest self, the self that is connected to something greater, something divine. And now I want to turn this back to you. What would it look like for you to live as Christ for 30 days? Not as a saint, not as a perfect being, but as a human being, fully present to the highs and lows of life, fully committed to love, even in the face of suffering. Maybe you won't heal the sick or walk on water, but that's not the point. The point is to live each day with the awareness that you are connected to something greater, that you are part of a divine plan, even if you can't always see it. The point is to show up, to be present, to love the people in your life with the same compassion and forgiveness that Christ showed. You don't have to wait for some grand spiritual moment to start living this way. You can start today. In fact, you can start right now. What would happen if, just for today, you chose to live as Christ? What if you chose to see the world through His eyes, to treat the people around you with the same love and compassion that He did? How would your life change? The answer, I believe, lies in the smallest moments. It's not about changing the world in a day. It's about changing the way you show up in the world, moment by moment. It's about choosing love, again and again, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. This journey has been one of the most transformative experiences of my life, not because it made me a better person, but because it made me a more human person. It taught me that being human is not a flaw. It's a gift. And in that humanity, we find our connection to the divine. As I come to the end of this experience, I feel a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunity to live as Christ for 30 days, but for the opportunity to live as myself fully, authentically, and with an open heart. And that, I believe, is the greatest lesson Christ has to offer us. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to be willing to show up, to love, and to trust that we are exactly where we need to be. So I leave you with this: how will you choose to live today? Will you choose to live as Christ did, with an open heart, with compassion, with love? Will you choose to embrace your humanity, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to be celebrated? Because in the end, that's what it means to live as Christ the human. It means living with love, with courage, and with the unwavering belief that, no matter what happens, we are never alone. We are always connected to the divine, always guided, always loved. And that, my friends, is the true gift of living as Christ. It's not about being perfect. It's about being fully human, and in that humanity, finding the divine.